Take a caller from Houston who has a question. Please go ahead, Houston, with your question.
Yeah, gentlemen, the news reports have said that the terrorists have had people in place in U.S. military-run schools. What I was curious about, what is the possibility of these terrorists being in place in our military as far as troops or even higher-ranking officers? And is the FBI investigating this?
Well, let's ask the chairman of the Armed Services Committee, first of all. What can you tell us about these reports that 3 or 4, perhaps 5 of these 19 terrorists who died in these hijackings, some of them at least, may have received training at U.S. military facilities?
We've asked for a report on that, and we'll get it. But I think it's important in the meantime that we not start becoming so suspicious of ourselves that we're going to lose our freedoms and, as a matter of fact, lose the ability just to have a life which is a relatively normal life. I don't believe that there's infiltration in the higher levels of our military. I don't think we should become paranoid. Obviously, we got to become more cautious, but we cannot let the terrorists destroy the fabric of our relationships, or else they would have succeeded.
Senator Warner, is it time to take a look at some of those programs where the United States brings individuals from other countries around the world and trains them to fly planes?
It's time to look at everything. Those programs have produced very valuable relationships over the years between ourselves and other countries. In times of crisis, those military people, having received training here, feel a certain loyalty and have stepped up. Let me go back and pick up on one thing. We are, this president, not, like his father, building a coalition. But those of us who watched carefully the engagement in Kosovo, where we had to sit with 19 nations in NATO around a table, and all had to be agreed before we did anything, we cannot follow that again. We cannot share, I think, as fully as we have, need all the intelligence, because these people move swiftly and quietly, and when we have them pinpointed, we've got to go. And on that point, there's discussion, well, should we use ground troops? Let me pick up. We have got to say that every asset of the United States is available to engage. The moment we take off the table some potential we have, whether it's through ground forces or other things, then the terrorists are going to skillfully plan to use that vacuum as their next avenue of attack. So everything should be on the table, all plans reviewed, and if we stand united behind our president, exercise patience, we're going to survive as a stronger nation.
Can I add one thing to that, Wolf, because I agree with it, but there's another aspect. We will be far more effective if other nations join with us. We can't take any of our own assets off the table. We've got to be ready for anything, and if necessary, to act alone, obviously. But we will be far more effective if it is a coalition, and will be doubly effective if some Islamic nations are part of that coalition. So it is not viewed in the Islamic world as the West versus Islam. It's got to be the West, including Islam, versus terrorists.
Senator Lugar, you're well known as one of the authorities in the Senate on international affairs. The opposite of what Senator Levin is saying is that if the U.S. tries to bring in all of these other coalition partners, it will restrict U.S. maneuverability, the U.S. ability to do what it believes is the best, take the best course of action. Are you at all concerned about that?
Well, there are a lot of restrictions if we're not able to get cooperation. I would agree with John Warner. We are not a group of 19, but we need to find out where we have common interest, where somebody is willing to work with us. We need to determine what we need to do. But I would just say one of the aspects of this, ironically, is we probably need to have more military people from other countries training with us. The problem here with the pilots was a lot of them were trained by civilian folks here in the United States, not our military. We are going to have to try to tie together with the military, with the diplomatic corps, but even more so with the intelligence people, unsavory as they may be, internationally with Russia, China, whoever is going to help us, because each one of these countries has a problem with militant Muslims on their border. They understand that, and it's the gut thing that's likely to bring them into our camp in this issue.
Senator Graham, you're the chairman of the Intelligence Committee. As you know, there's a lot of intelligence types in Washington have been grumbling for years, especially since 1995, that they've had sort of one hand tied behind their back. They haven't been able to go out and recruit sources, agents within these terrorist cells, put them on the U.S. government's payroll, if you will, out of fear that they would be criticized by by Congress. How do you deal with that issue of having to get down there in the gutter, if you will, with rats if necessary?
Let me first comment on Senator Lugar's statement. I completely agree with what he and Carl Levin have said. I was in Pakistan 2 weeks ago, and prior to that time had a briefing from some Russian officials about their view of Afghanistan. And the Russians are as concerned about the Taliban as we are. They fought a 10-year war against the Taliban. Afghanistan is the principal source of heroin that's coming in to Russia. It is a destabilizing entity relative to those rather already unstable states on the southern border of Russia. So we have the potential of building an alliance based on self-interest of these other countries. As it relates to our restrictions, we've had a policy, particularly in the CIA, that we would not hire a foreign national who had an unsavory background. The fact is, if you want to get somebody to get close to bin Laden and be able to understand what he's thinking about and what actions he may be likely to take, I would not suggest that you go to the monastery to try to find that person. The people that have the ability to get close are likely to be people pretty much like the ones who are now working with bin Laden. So we've got to be more pragmatic in terms of our willingness to accept the fact that if it's important to us to be able to understand terrorist activities early enough to stop them from occurring, then we are likely to have as one of our tactics the ability to deal with some unsavory people who can serve a legitimate purpose of intelligence for the benefit of the United States people.
Senator Kerry, are you ready to go along with that and put some of these unsavory types, terrorists who have a lot of blood on their hands, on the U.S. government's payroll as sources, as agents inside, for example, Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden's organization?
Well, obviously, if they're well managed and within the limits of what you're trying to achieve, it's important to sometimes do that. I mean, when I was a prosecutor, we had an old saying. I mean, all prosecutors have the saying, when you're trying the devil, you don't go to heaven for your witnesses. And so it's fairly obvious that if you're going to try to get information, you're going to have to deal with these folks. And we've gotten a little bit goody two-shoes about it in the wake of a lot of other kinds of problems that we faced in the past. This is a different kind of fight now. We're not talking about states or countries or people who once upon a time adhered to some kind of international standard, who had a rule of law. These are complete renegades. These are terrorists. Their mission is to spread terror. They are attacking the very foundations of civilized society. And everybody has something at stake in that. So I'm absolutely prepared to use the tools necessary. When you're waging a war, you do what's necessary to win. And obviously, because we are the United States of America, we have always interpreted that to mean within our value system and without losing the best of what makes us different from other countries as the United States. But I'm prepared to do things differently.
Senator Warner, the Vice President Dick Cheney confirmed today that when one of those planes, those hijacked planes, was going towards Washington, U.S. fighter jets were authorized to shoot that plane down if necessary. I want to listen once again to what the Vice President said earlier today and get your reaction. Listen to this. Now, we don't have that soundbite, but let me read it to you, what Vice President Cheney said.
By heart.
Well, our viewers, I want to remind our viewers, if the plane would not divert, the hijacked plane, if they wouldn't pay any attention to instructions to move away from the city, as a last resort, our pilots were authorized to take them out.
I accept that statement at face value, and it's one that we'll be examining this week, and what other steps we can put as a precaution, hopefully not to do that. You know, in this wonderful discussion we've had among 6 good friends and colleagues, I think what comes to the forefront that the Congress is unified behind the President. I ask Congress, as has others. Dick Gephardt was here with a brilliant statement a minute ago. We've got to get together, pass on these issues with a minimum of dissent, some debate, which is constructive to explain to the American people what we do. I hope my colleague, Chairman Levin, and I, as we've worked together these 23 years, can get our bill up and give the President those things that he has asked for and which today and tomorrow and in the future he needs to defend this nation.
Senator Levin, I asked Secretary Powell earlier today if it was time to rethink the current ban that's been in effect since 1976, the prohibition on assassination. And he said it's time to rethink everything, in effect. I'm paraphrasing what he said. Is it time to perhaps lift that ban?
I think it's time to rethink everything, and some of the things we have to do secretly and quietly, regardless of what the express and the outward ban is. But I think we have to look at all options, including that, and whether it's done openly or whether it's done quietly, depending on the evidence and the circumstances. I think we have to we have to be willing to do that under the circumstances. As far as shooting down the plane is concerned, I'm glad to hear that they were able to move that quickly, to be able to take that action if necessary. Where I was a little surprised was that even though we had perhaps a half hour's notice that that plane aiming at the Pentagon had turned around, that there was no warning inside of the Pentagon or public buildings or other buildings in Washington. And that is something that we will look to over time. For the moment, though, and I just visited the Pentagon again this morning, by the way, the people who are working at the Pentagon are heroes and heroines right now doing extraordinary work with huge American background and a totally united American people in Congress. It is a very impressive people, and a very impressive thing, and people should be aware of it all over the country, that this is a united country and that we have thousands of people donating volunteering services and money right now in a common effort.
Senator Lugar, I just want your reaction on that issue of rethinking the whole matter of assassinations.
Everything will be rethought, but I would just say the last retaliatory strike against bin Laden was a self-defense measure. And my guess is that we will define what occurs as defense, as self-defense, as justifiable. I think that was a reasonable interpretation at that time. I think that's reasonable now.
Senator Kerry, I just want your thoughts on this. I know that you've been studying this for some years. Rethink the policy of assassinations?
Certainly with regard to terrorism, no question about it. And I think that there is no question that we are going to have to do a great deal on the clandestine front here, our intelligence gathering, how we execute afterwards with respect to the information that we have found. I'm not sure any of us want to share all the options publicly at this point in time, but it's clear that all of us have to put this in an historical perspective. This is different from anything that has happened previously to us, and the threat it poses to us is larger even than what happened to the World Trade Center. These people believe we are the infidels. They think we are the great Satan. They are conducting a deeply religious, deeply ideological war against us and have been for a long period of time. Our embassies have been blown up. Our ships have been blown up. Our airplanes have already been blown out of the sky or directed out of the sky. And we are now witnessing the last escalation. The United States and the civilized world cannot sit by and watch this happen. So we have to respond in whatever way we defend ourselves appropriately.
Unfortunately, Senator Kerry, we could go on. I want to thank you. I want to thank Senator Graham and our Miami Bureau, Senator Warner, of course, Senator Lugar, Senator Levin. Thanks to all of you for joining us.
Could I have 5 seconds to tell you something to show you how America can come back? Yesterday, the USS Cole was launched. She's back in the fleet. There's a clear example of the resolve in this country to fight back.
On that note, I want to thank all of the senators for joining us today. Thank you very much. And world leaders are declaring that a strike against the United States is a strike against all of the civilized world. CNN's chief international correspondent Christiane Amanpour spoke to the British Prime Minister Tony Blair earlier today. She joins us now live from London. Christiane, give us the headlines.
Well, the headlines, I think, Wolf, are that Tony Blair, first of all, having been one of the first and loudest condemning the bomb attack on the United States and standing shoulder to shoulder with the United States, today said for the first time that he, like President Bush, views what happened as an act of war and a declaration of war. He then went on to say that they were still waiting for the evidence and that, the future action was being considered. but that he believed there would be a very strong international coalition, and that Britain would most likely, I read this between the lines, take part in any military action.
I'm very pleased at the way that America and the